Snow glare turned the world into a hard, bright sheet. The kind of brightness that didn't feel like daylight so much as exposure, like the mountains had peeled the sky open and dared anyone to blink. They moved single file along a wind-scoured ridge, boots crunching a thin crust that never stopped sounding too loud. Every step carried. Every breath fogged the air and fell away in the gusts. To their left, the slope dropped into a broad bowl of snow and rock, smooth as poured concrete. To their right, jagged black teeth of stone pushed through drifts like ribs. Daytime should have been safety. Daytime was supposed to be visibility, control, distance. But the ridge felt watched, and the silence felt staged. The point man lifted a gloved fist. Halt. The line froze mid-stride, a living statue in white and muted camouflage. Their leader, a senior petty officer everyone called Mason, swept the valley with his binoculars. Nothing moved. No heat shimmer. No smoke. No birds. Just a gray-green tree line far off, and above it, a higher ridge that ran like a blade across the horizon. He lowered the glasses, tapped the radio handset, once as if that would persuade it to behave. "Check," he said. Static answered, thin, intermittent like someone rubbing wool on glass. Mason tried again. "All stations, comms check." A broken half-syllable came back, then a long hiss. It wasn't dead yet. It was worse. It was drowning. He made a quick hand sign. "Keep moving, tighter spacing, eyes up." The line eased forward. The first impact wasn't a crack. It was a soft, brutal punctuation, a body stumbling as if the snow had suddenly grabbed a boot and yanked. The point man's knee buckled. He pitched forward, arms flaring, and then he was down, face turned into the drift. A half-second later, the sound arrived. A distant, sharp report, flattened by cold air and distance. Long shot. High ground. Mason's head snapped up, already moving, already calculating. Before he could speak, a second impact kicked snow beside the down man's shoulder. Tight puff. Not a spray. Not a warning. A message, don't touch him. "Contact," someone shouted, and the word felt obscene in the open, like lighting a flare that didn't need to be lit. Mason dropped to a knee and grabbed the point man's collar, yanking him back behind a low swell. Blood seeped into the white, a dark bloom that shouldn't exist in such a clean place. "Where?" Another voice. "Where's it coming from?" The answer was geometry. The ridgeline above. The far ridge, the one that dominated everything. The one Mason's binoculars had rested on a second too long, without admitting why. "Down!" Mason barked, and his team poured off the ridge into the shallow depression below, a scramble of bodies and packs and rifles. The bowl swallowed them, and then the bowl became a trap. Fire angled down from two directions, left and right, rifle rounds snapping and thudding, cutting the air above their heads. Every attempt to peek drew immediate punishment. Mason could feel the kill zone like a diagram. They were the dot in the center, and the enemy had drawn clean lines to them. The radio hiss grew louder, deeper, like a machine that had finally spun up. Mason pressed the transmit button until his thumb hurt. "Higher," he tried to say, but his voice broke into static, swallowed by something that wasn't weather. The medic slid beside the point man, hands already working, and a moment he leaned in to drag the wounded man deeper into cover. Another precise round punched into the snow inches from his glove. A third hit snapped in the medic's shoulder plate. Hard enough to spin him, hard enough to knock him flat. "Second casualty," someone yelled. Snow exploded in tight puffs around hands and knees. Whoever was shooting wasn't trying to paint the depression with lead. They were selecting, pinning, controlling. Mason's mind ran faster than his body could. This wasn't a chaotic ambush. This was a net. A shape moved near the tree line. Two figures, one hefting a tube. An RPG team. They hunkered, angling the launcher toward the bowl. One shot, and the shallow cover would become a coffin. Mason's rifle came up, but the distance was ugly and the wind was sharp, and the enemy had all the time in the world. He squeezed anyway, control shots, more to keep them honest than to expect a hit. The RPG gunner didn't flinch, and then the gunner folded. Not flinched, folded, like a puppet with cut strings. The tube dropped into the snow. The warhead touched down and steamed faintly in the cold. a thin vapor rising as if even the metal was exhaling. Mason froze, sight picture faltering. There had been no muzzle flash from his team. No crack nearby. The shot had come from somewhere else. Somewhere high. Somewhere with an angle that could see the RPG team in a way Mason couldn't. An angle that shouldn't exist, at least not from where they were. A second figure near the tree line, spotter, radio man, someone directing, staggered as if shoved. He collapsed sideways and didn't get up. The enemy fire faltered. Not stopped, but stuttered, as if the hands coordinating it had suddenly lost their rhythm. For a heartbeat, the bowl felt less like a perfect diagram and more like a fight. Mason looked up over the lip, scanning the ridges. White slopes, black rock teeth. Nothing. No silhouette. No glint. No movement. Help was real. Help was invisible. The radio hiss dipped for half a second, just a stumble like a generator misfiring, then surged again. Mason caught that dip like a lifeline. The jammer wasn't untouchable. Something had just hit it, or hit someone feeding it. Someone was dismantling the ambush from the outside. But that someone wasn't on his net. Mason risked a hand signal. Prepare to move. The rock outcrop ahead, dark stone breaking the snow, was the only real cover within reach. If they could reach it, they could survive long enough to think. Enemy rounds began shifting, snapping higher, angling toward the ridge lines instead of the bowl. The enemy had noticed the same thing Mason had. An unseen marksman was taking pieces off the board. They started hunting the hunter. The pressure on the bowl eased just enough for Mason to drag the wounded point man by the harness. The medic, gritting through pain, got one arm under the second casualty and began pulling him deeper, jaw clenched, eyes wide, doing the work despite the fear. A final shot cracked across the valley, different cadence, different authority. Somewhere, a voice that had been directing the enemy simply stopped existing. The fire broke into confused bursts, like a choir losing its conductor. Mason lifted his head one last time, searching for the ghost who had just saved them. And then the world cut, hard like someone slammed a door. Earlier that day, the cold had been honest instead of murderous. Honest cold still hurt, but it didn't lie to you. It didn't promise safety and then turn into a trap. Their forward staging point sat in a shallow valley where the wind rolled like water through scrub and snow. Helicopters were grounded by gusts that came in sudden fists, rattling rotors on their tie-downs. The team waited near a canvas shelter that snapped and flapped, the sound like distant gunfire. Mason stood over a map board with a liaison officer, gloved finger tracing lines. Relay site here, the officer said. Remote sensor feed. Tracks movement through the passes. Higher command wants it verified and secured. Routine, but high value. Routine. Mason hated that word. It made people lazy. His guys were in that mood anyway. Jokes. Nudges, that loose confidence that came from too many missions that ended with everyone breathing. Someone complained about the cold. Someone else said the cold was good, kept the smell down. They laughed. Then the liaison added, almost like an afterthought, "You'll have an attached marksman for Overwatch." The laughter shifted. Not stopped. Shifted into something sharper. From where? One of Mason's guys asked. Partner cold weather program, the liaison said. Young. Qualified. Better than qualified. Define young, another man said, already smiling like he knew the punchline. The marksman arrived without ceremony. Small profile under bulky cold gear. Hood up, face mostly hidden behind a scarf and goggles. She moved like someone who didn't waste energy. She didn't scan the room for approval. She didn't offer a hand too fast. She simply stopped at the edge of the group and waited for instruction as if that was the natural state of things. Someone muttered, not quietly enough. That's the marksman? Seriously? Another chuckled. We running a mission or a photo op? Mason shot them a look that said cut it, but the vibe stayed. Dismissal had its own gravity. It pulled. The teen didn't react. She dropped her pack and began checking her kit with slow, precise movements. Magazine count, opticap, bolt, sling, glove tape. She had a small card, data, notes, taped inside her left glove cuff, protected from wind. A spare battery sat in an inner pocket close to body heat. She breathed through her nose, steady, like she'd learned long ago that the cold punished open mouths. Mason watched her for a second longer than he intended. He'd seen loud confidence. He'd seen fragile bravado. This wasn't either. This was quiet focus, the kind that didn't need witnesses. "What's your name?" one of the guys asked, not unkindly, but with a tone that carried an assumption. "You're a kid." She answered, voice low. "Call signs enough." That didn't satisfy them, but it didn't need to. She wasn't there to entertain. The brief continued. Time pressure was baked into it, an extraction window dictated by weather, by airframes, by daylight. "Daytime is safe," the liaison said, as if the sun was a security plan. "Get in, verify, exfil." Mason raised a hand. "Comms. Line of sight mostly," the liaison said. "Sight is spotty in the valley." The teen shifted her gaze to the map, eyes narrowing slightly. Not skepticism, more like she was solving an equation. As they prepped to step off, she wandered to the edge of the valley and lifted her radio, testing. The response was an intermittent buzz, a pulse that didn't sound like terrain reflection. She frowned, barely visible behind her scarf, and walked back to Mason. "Something's riding the band," she said. "Calm. Not dramatic. Not normal." Mason's comms guy shrugged. "Mountains. Happens." The teen didn't argue. She just nodded as if logging the note in a mental notebook. Before they moved, she asked Mason quietly, "Overwatch route. Higher ridge. Takes longer, but gives control." Mason checked the sky, watched the gusts shove snow off distant peaks. The extraction window was already tight. "We go as planned," he said. "Daylight. Fast." Her eyes flicked to the bowl-shaped valley approach on the map, the one with sparse cover and high ridges on either side. She didn't say no. She just looked at it the way a person looks at a door they know is locked. As the team moved out, she took the rear overwatch position. The guys ahead laughed and talked, shoulders loose. She stayed quiet, head turning, reading the land. She noticed straight lines in the snow that didn't match wind patterns. A windbreak that looked placed too neat. Faint tracks that weren't random, compressed in repeated spots like platforms. Prep positions. Locals at the staging point had refused to go near the relay site. Mason had taken that as fear. The team took it as a warning sign with detail. Even birds avoided one stand of trees along the approach. In a world this white and open, absence was information. She adjusted her loadout just before they hit the valley proper, pulled a comfort item from a pocket, replaced it with another magazine. She checked her backup iron solution, a simple fallback that didn't care about batteries or fog. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Then the valley swallowed the team the way a mouth swallows sound. Snow glare flattened distance. Ridges looked closer than they were. Movements on the horizon were tricks of light. The team advanced anyway, controlled, scanning. Mason's point man stepped forward, and then the bullet arrived before the sound. The rest unfolded fast and slow at the same time. Fast because bodies dropped and hands moved and blood hit snow. Slow because the teen on the rear ridge saw the geometry clicking into place like a trap being sprung. She heard the first impact, saw Mason yank the wounded man down, heard the radio hiss deepen into something deliberate. She tried to transmit. Her words came back at her as broken noise. The enemy had brought a jammer. Not a random one, a tuned one. The pulsing buzz she'd heard earlier wasn't the mountain. It had been a rehearsal. Shots came from high ground, disciplined, careful, aimed at the radio carrier and the man in front. Blind and pin. The depression the team dove into wasn't cover. It was containment. Gusts pushed powdered snow through the bowl, creating sudden white curtains that hid enemy, repositioning. The enemy knew the wind cycles. They'd built the plan around it. The teen watched the team below, dark shapes in a bright world, pinned, trying to help wounded men while rounds stitched the snow inches from their hands. It wasn't chaos. It was selective control. She saw the RPG team at the tree-lean edge, setting up to finish them. She saw a spotter pair shifting between rocks, communicating. She saw a crew-served weapon team preparing to lock the bowl. Mason tried protocol, marker for air support for emergency, but wind tore it sideways, and the radio net was dead anyway. Time pressure tightened like a knot. Extraction would close. Encirclement would complete. Then the moral constraint. A lone shepherd, far off, moving across a slope with an animal, unaware. If the teen started shooting without control, a miss could travel forever in thin, cold air. A ricochet off rock could do what bullets always did, choose their own ending. She didn't have the luxury of panic. Panic was loud. She had to be quiet. She was cut off by distance and terrain, separated from the team by the bowl and the ridges. No one could order her. No one could even hear her. That meant one thing. Responsibility didn't need permission. Staying put meant watching them die. She committed to a solo flank without announcing it. Not because she wanted glory, because there was no other move left that changed the diagram. She chose a narrow spine of rock and wind-packed snow that kept her below the skyline. A long route. A careful route. The kind that felt like it took forever, even when every second mattered. She moved in pulses. Crawl, pause, listen. Crawl, pause, watch the wind. The cold tried to steal her fingers. The glare tried to steal her depth perception. The sound of gunfire below tried to steal her attention. She didn't let it. She timed her movement to gusts, letting the wind cover the crunch of snow. Silence became a tool. Halfway along the spine, her optic began to fog. Breath, cold glass, slight temperature shift, condensation. The world through her scope turned milky. She didn't curse. She didn't rush. She tilted her head, used her scarf to redirect breath, warmed the scope with a gloved palm for a few seconds, then pulled her hand away before it could leave a visible mark. She crawled past a windbreak that looked too neat to be nature. Camouflaged netting scraps caught on rock. Stomped platforms in snow, compacted by repeated boots. Someone had spent time here. Someone had planned this in daylight. The drone came as a faint buzz first, almost like a fly that didn't belong at altitude. A small quad, dark against the white, swept a ridge line in a lazy pattern. The teen flattened under a rock lip, body pressed into cold stone, and let it pass. Taking a shot would have been satisfying. It would also have been a flare. Her ammo was not infinite. Her life was not expendable. Her purpose was not to win a personal duel. It was to break the trap. She counted rounds in her head the way some people counted prayers. Then equipment failure hit anyway. A battery, warmed in her pocket, still drained too fast in the cold. The optic's illumination flickered and died. One of her turret adjustments felt gritty, sluggish from icing. She switched to simpler methods. Holds. References. The taped data inside her glove. The backup solution she'd packed because she'd anticipated exactly this. The cold didn't care about gear marketing. Ahead, a high notch in the ridge revealed itself, a cut in rock that overlooked the enemy's lateral line. From there, the tree-lean edge wasn't a distant mystery. It was an exposed flank. The geometry flipped. She eased into the notch, careful not to silhouette. She built a stable platform, pack under forearm, rifle settled, sling tensioned, body aligned to reduce muscle tremor. In the bright cold, even a heartbeat could feel like movement. She let her breathing slow, let fear exist without driving. Down below, the bowl was still bleeding. Mason's team was still pinned, still working, still trying to function through fear. She scanned the enemy positions with calm eyes. There, the jammer. Not a single obvious box, but a small setup near a rock cluster. A man hovering near it, adjusting, feeding power. Around him, a pair of spotters communicating. Off to one side, the RPG team. One down, another man trying to take the tube. She checked the shepherd's position again. Too close to one lane. She adjusted her angle to keep her misses running into safe snow. Not rock, not skyline. Moral restraint wasn't softness. It was discipline. She also saw something else. Not everyone was shooting. Two fighters near the relay site itself were moving with cutting tools and a hard case, working fast. This was not just an ambush. This was cover. The jam wasn't only to isolate the team. It was to blind the region while something was stolen. A data module. A relay heart. Something worth more than bullets. She settled, timed her breathing, and let the battlefield noise fade to a distant roar. Her world narrowed to reticle, wind, and decision. First, deliberate trigger press. Quiet. Controlled. The shot traveled like a secret. The man at the jammer jerked, collapsed against the rig. The interference in the air didn't vanish instantly, but it stuttered, waves of weakness, like a fist loosening. The jammer's hold on the band slipped for a fraction, then surged again as someone else grabbed for control. She didn't wait for perfection. She worked the ladder. Forced multipliers first. Her second shot took one of the spotters' center mass clean. The man dropped behind a rock and didn't rise. Third shot, his partner, caught as he leaned to look the moment his curiosity became exposure. That body slid slowly, leaving a dark smear on white. Enemy fire into the bowl lost rhythm. Without spotters calling timing, it became reactive, bursts instead of deliberate holds. Mason's team felt it as a slight change in air, less snapping near faces, more random impacts. The team moved to the RPG threat. The replacement gunner was lifting the tube, angling it toward the depression. She waited for the exact moment he committed to the posture, shoulders squared, weight set, then sent the round. He folded. The tube dropped again, steam ghosting in the cold. Down below, Mason saw it and felt the first true opening. Not safety, but possibility. Then came the turning point. The enemy wasn't just a collection of shooters. There was a mind shaping them. A commander or a mortar lead, someone adjusting the bracketing impacts that had been hemming the bowl. The team found him by behavior. The one who moved with confidence, who didn't shoot much, who pointed, who watched others obey. He leaned over a map board or a range card, something simple, protected behind a rock. She sent one round. The man's head snapped back. He dropped without drama. And with him went the enemy's cohesion. You could feel it even at distance. A hesitation, a confusion, a sudden lack of shared purpose. Mason didn't waste the gift. He flashed hand signals. Move now. The team surged toward the rock outcrop, dragging wounded men, firing controlled suppressive bursts into ridge lines that had lost their perfect timing. The medic, teeth clenched, kept pressure on wounds while running half-crouched, doing the work despite the fear. For a moment, it looked like a break. The enemy adapted fast. Competent enemies always did. They stopped trying to crush the bowl alone and shifted into a counterhot. Fire angled up toward ridge lines, searching for the unseen marksman. A drone returned, sweeping higher now, more aggressive. A crew-served gun, heavy, patient, began raking the slopes above the notch, tried to force movement, trying to draw a silhouette. The team felt the first impacts crack into rock near her position. Chips of stone snapped into the air. A round slammed into the snow berm beside her rifle and threw powder across her gloves. Ammo count dropped. Cold and heat cycling made her weapon feel sluggish, the action slightly stiff. Her position was becoming known. She did what she prepared to do. She displaced. Not far, just laterally to a secondary nook she'd already seen, already measured in her head. She stayed below skyline, moved during gusts, and left a false trace. A dragged glove line in snow that led away from her true position. A lie for the climbers. The counterhunt team began climbing toward the notch, using wind and rock for cover. They moved carefully, not panicked. They were good. She refused greed. Greed got marksman killed. She waited until the lead climber committed to a move between rocks. One shot. He dropped and slid a short distance, snagging on a jut of stone. The second climber froze, unsure. She waited for the moment his fear turned into action, when he tried to rush past his fallen teammate. Second shot. He collapsed, and the rest of the team went prone, suddenly cautious, suddenly slow. Time bled away from them. Time was what Mason needed. Below, comms returned in fragments. Not full clarity, but enough. One clean transmission punched through as the jammer stayed down. A coordinate, a vector, an extraction cue. Mason's voice came through, ragged but present, like someone resurfacing from drowning. The team didn't answer. She couldn't risk giving away her position with transmission. Instead, she listened and kept working. And then she saw the theft team. Two fighters moving fast from the relay site with a hard case. Not a weapon case. A data case. They hustled along the tree-lean edge, heading toward a notch that would take them out of view and into the next valley. If they escaped with it, the whole mission failed even if Mason's team lived. Worse, the enemy would have what they came for: blindness, leverage, propaganda. She had a choice, and it was the kind that made your stomach feel hollow. Protect the team's movement or stop the theft. She couldn't do both fully, not with ammo low and a counterhunt searching for her. She split the difference with one decisive shot. She targeted the carrier's leg, low and controlled, choosing an impact that dropped the man without detonating anything inside the case. The fighter went down hard, the case tumbling into snow and stopping intact. The second man reached for it, hesitated as if expecting the world to end, then grabbed the strap. She sent another round, close enough to make him flinch, far enough not to risk the case. He abandoned it and ran, leaving the objective in the open. Enemy fire surged again as they realized their theft had failed. The crew-served gun hammered the ridgeline harder. The drone buzzed back and forth like an angry insect. The teen fired her last controlled rounds into force multipliers trying to reform the net, a hand signal coordinator, a shooter moving to a better ridge, a man reaching for the abandoned jammer setup. Each shot was chosen. Each shot was quiet violence with purpose. Below, Mason's team reached the rock outcrop and then pushed beyond it toward the extraction zone. The wounded men were still alive. Barely, but alive. The medic was pale with pain, but his hands were steady. Fear existed in all of them, but function kept winning by inches. Rotor noise arrived like a promise. Or, if not rotors, then the distinct churn of engines and the shouted commands of a ground element punching in to meet them. Either way, rescue was no longer theoretical. The enemy, deprived of leadership and multipliers, broke contact in pieces. Not routed, disciplined enough to pull back, but no longer able to crush the seal element in daylight snow. Their plan had been precise. It had been broken by someone they hadn't accounted for, a quiet marksman they assumed couldn't matter. The teen stayed in her notch until she was sure Mason's team was moving, sure they weren't re-sealed into the bowl. Then she slid backward into the rock shadow and began her own withdrawal, careful, slow, letting the wind erase her tracks. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt emptied, adrenaline drained into a cold tremor in her hands, the kind you couldn't stop by willpower. She forced her fingers to keep working anyway, checking her weapon, controlling her breathing, staying alive. When she finally reached the staging area hours later, daylight was still harsh, but the sound had changed. Not gunfire, not rotor wash, just a thin, constant wind moving across snow. Blood looked wrong on white ground. Dark, heavy, too real. Mason's team sat or lay under shelter while med personnel worked. The point man was pale, eyes open, breathing shallow. The medic's shoulder was wrapped, his face tight, but he was awake. Men who'd been joking earlier now stared at nothing, processing. Mason stood near a map board, face drawn, jaw clenched, listening to a debrief. Someone replayed the kill zone. The selective shots, the sudden drop in enemy coordination, the moments when the pressure eased as if a hand had lifted. Ghost shots. One of the guys said quietly, half a joke, half a confession that he didn't understand what had happened. Mason didn't smile. He looked toward the edge of the shelter where the teen sat alone, gear still on, rifle across her lap, hands moving with slow precision as she cleaned the weapon. The steadiness wasn't for show. It was control. Silence reclaiming space violence had tried to own. The liaison officer laid out what they confirmed. The enemy had planned the ambush to cover a theft or sabotage at the relay site. The jammer wasn't only to isolate Mason's team. It was to blind tracking while the objective was taken. The hard case recovered in the snow contained the relay's core module, enough to compromise the network, enough to give the enemy a propaganda victory if they could claim they'd outplayed a top-tier unit in daylight. Evidence lined up with the anomalies the teen had noticed. Pre-built platforms in snow, placed windbreak, the pulsing interference signature before step-off. The routine mission had been baked. The civilian shepherd was safe. No collateral. No unintended tragedy to haunt the ending. That hadn't been luck either. That had been lane discipline, the kind that required moral restraint under pressure. The guys who'd mocked her earlier didn't meet her eyes at first. Their confidence had collapsed into something awkward, respect that didn't know how to speak. No grand apology, no dramatic speech, just small gestures that carried more weight than words. Someone slid a heater closer to her corner. Another offered a patch with a quiet nod. A third cleared a seat near the group without making a ceremony. Mason approached last. He didn't tower over her. He didn't perform authority. He just stood, looked at her hands, at the clean metal, at the calm that had saved lives. "You heard the jammer before we moved," he said. She kept cleaning. It didn't sound like terrain. "You asked for the high route," Mason said. She paused, then nodded once. Not accusation. Not pride. Fact. Mason exhaled, and for the first time since the first impact, his shoulders dropped a fraction. "You didn't argue." "I've learned arguing doesn't move bullets," she said quietly. It wasn't bitterness. It was a rule she'd written in herself over years of being underestimated. Competence doesn't need permission. It needs results. Mason turned toward the liaison, toward the report being written, toward the official version of what happened. He knew how stories got told. He knew how people got erased into support or unknown shooter when the truth didn't fit expectations. He made a decision that felt small and heavy at the same time. In the report, he named her, not as an attachment, not as a footnote, as the reason an ambush turned into an extraction. When the debrief ended and the shelter quieted, she stepped outside for a moment. The daylight was still brutal, snow bright enough to hurt. Wind moved across drifts and made the world look untouched again, like violence could be erased by weather. She stood alone, rifle clean, breath steady, and watched the white valley where the kill zone had been drawn. The mountains didn't care who lived. The snow didn't care who earned respect. The work did. And in that harsh light, the truth was simple. Respect wasn't asked for in the whiteout. It was earned, one quiet shot at a time.